Welcome everyone. I have 1 o'clock on my computer, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Participants, when you have a question, we ask that you would put it in the chat box on the right-hand side. The chat box is easier for us to respond to than the Q&A, but either one we will answer. We just have a preference towards the chat box. My name is Brooke Stefancik. I'm the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Educator in Sullivan County, and I also work with the 4-H program. Today I'm talking about preventative measures for a healthy poultry flock. So I wanted to start with introducing all of our Area 5 Ag and Natural Resource educators. We have been working together to host both the garden series, which happened before the poultry series, this poultry series, and then also a pond series. So we've been working closely together to still offer educational programming during a time where we can't meet face-to-face. So if you ever have any questions related to ag, you can contact the educator in your county, and their names are listed on here. And if you're not within our area in Indiana, or if you're in a different state, you also have educators. They may be regional, but every state in the country has an extension system. So the objectives for my presentation today is to give you a basic understanding of poultry physiology, of poultry nutrition, and then how to use that information to raise a healthy flock. And as we know, an ounce of prevention gives us a pound of cure. So if we can prevent disease or maladies from happening, it'll be easier than trying to treat them once they do happen. We're going to start with the intro to physiology. So we're just going to go through a couple of the main systems in birds and how that might relate to you managing your flock at home. So the skeletal system is just the structural support of the body and muscles, just like in humans and other mammals. Gives protection to the internal organs. And one of the interesting things to me, especially for laying hens, is that it can provide a source of calcium and phosphorus. So we have different types of bones, as I have listed on the screen, but the two main ones that I want to highlight are the medullary and the pneumatic bones. So medullary bones are certain bones that can provide a quick source of calcium for laying hens. So if their diet is not sufficient in calcium, they can use the reserve from their bones to still provide what they need, and that is basically kind of what they need to make that eggshell around the egg. And then the pneumatic is more of a fun fact that they do have some bones that are hollow, and the insides of those bones are connected to the respiratory system, including the lungs. The last fun fact I have for you about the skeletal system is that they have more vertebrae in their neck than humans. So that's why their neck is more free and can turn better, and that's so they can see danger approaching more easily, and also to preen feathers, which we'll talk about what preening is here in a minute. The next system is the respiratory system, and this is something that is unique for poultry. When I took my physiology class in college over poultry, I thought this was something really cool that I learned. So obviously, just like us, the purpose is to provide oxygen to the blood and remove carbon dioxide through the lungs. And it can also help remove heat from the body when they pant. So if you see chickens out panting, they're probably experiencing some heat stress, and it can be more significant, but just slight panting is usually okay, and we'll talk more about that later. So the fun facts for chickens are that they have two lungs, just like mammals, but they're not as expandable. So our lungs, expand a lot when we breathe in, but theirs do not. They kind of stay the same size. The cool thing is they have 9 air sacs that are also connected to the lungs. So when they breathe, the first breath goes into the rear air sacs, and then when they first expire, that air is transferred through the lungs to be oxygenated. Then the third inspiration sends the air to the front air sacs, and then the expiration is sending that old air out, and then the process starts over. So really, instead of just a basic in-out breathing system like we have, they have 4 steps instead of just a simple 2. So the other good thing to note is that the average respiration rate of chickens is 30 breaths per minute. And so this can help you identify if your chickens are in distress or sick, because if you can kind of watch their breathing and you can track it over like a 10 to 15 second time and multiply it up to a minute, then you can kind of know if they're having an average respiration rate or lower or higher, then you might need to seek additional medical care. The digestive system is used to break down material so that the nutrients can be absorbed by the body, very similar to us again. So the process is that they ingest the food, it's broken down into simple products, absorbed in the intestines, and then waste is eliminated. So I'm going to go through some of the main parts of the digestive system, and you can kind of follow along on the picture I have there. So the crop is the first place. You can see it's in the front there. Food can be stored there while it's waiting to be passed through the rest of the system, and carbohydrates are starting to break down in that system. The next step is the proventriculus, and this is like the equivalent to the human stomach. So there's some acid in there, and it helps break down foods. It is smaller in our regular poultry that we would keep in our house, but for those avian species that are eating a lot of aquatic animals, their proventriculus is larger to help digest those things. The next is the gizzard. It uses grit, which is basically very small stones, and it's like it mechanically grinds the food. So as we know, chickens don't have teeth, so this is like the replacement of teeth for chewing. So there's some muscles in there that contract back and forth, which rub that grit, and that just kind of breaks down the food that they have. So similar to us grinding down, corn or something to make flour, they have a similar system in their gizzard. Next is the small intestines. And that is what absorbs the nutrients. So after it's kind of broken down in the first 3 systems, they go through the small intestine to be absorbed. And it also is responsible for some hormones that help to regulate digestion. The next step is the ceca. That's here. The main function of that is to absorb water, and it helps ferment fibers in the food. So especially those poultry who might be out on pasture, the ceca would be more important for breaking down some of that grass fiber. And then the large intestine is next. It reabsorbs water as needed and minerals and helps to balance the bodily fluids in the chicken. So it kind of acts as the regulator. And then finally we have the cloaca and the vent, and that is just the exit for everything that doesn't get absorbed. Next, we have the integumentary system, and that is just a collective name for a lot of different things, including the feathers, which are especially important in the winter to provide thermal insulation, the skin, which just like us protects, what's inside, their internal organs, And then the preen gland is something interesting to me. So you can see in the picture here, the preen gland is labeled. So it creates a special oil that the birds, you'll see them reaching around and kind of, they move their nose over it, peck at it a little bit, and they use that oil then and spread it over their feathers, and it gives them this kind of waterproof layer and protection over their feathers. Also includes their feet, which have thick skin. That helps them just withstand, the normal abrasions, walking in the coop or out in pasture if you let your chickens out. The beak, obviously, to help consume the food, and they will also use that as a tool to establish pecking orders. So they will use their beak to, peck the other chickens to say, hey, I'm the boss. And then finally, combs, wattles, and earlobes are also included. And those are very vascular regions, which means there's a lot of veins there. So they will use those to help cool themselves as well. So during the summer, the veins in those areas can get bigger, and that will help them cool down because the outside air will help remove some of that heat from their body. So an interesting fact related to feathers is that when the egg-laying cycle stops, the estrogen levels in hens will decrease, and that's when the birds will molt. So it's usually about once a year that they will molt all their feathers and get new ones. And that also is impacted by light as well. So the amount of daylight, it's all related. And then the final thing we're going to talk to is basic reproduction. So I have listed here the sexual maturity for each different types of avian species. So chickens will be mature by 5 to 6 months of age. Turkeys, 6 to 7 months of age. Ducks and geese, 4 to 7 months. Quail, 6 to 7 weeks. And guinea, 8 to 9 months. So that means it's going to take up to 5 to 6 months from the time you get those chicks to start seeing the beginning of egg laying. And the first eggs that you get will be fairly small, and it'll be later in that laying cycle that the eggs will get larger. So egg laying is stimulated by photoperiod, which means the number of hours of daylight impact when egg laying will increase. So as day length gets longer and reaches 14 hours, the amount of eggs that you get should increase. And so then as the days start getting shorter towards winter, you won't see as many eggs being laid. Some will try to utilize lighting in their coops to extend the daylight into the fall or start it a little earlier in the spring for egg laying. You just have to be careful when you do that because they do need that natural rest period just to go through that natural system, or it could cause them some problems in the long run. And then we talked a little bit about this last time, but hens will usually stay productive for about 2 years. And after those 2 years, the productivity will decrease. So it's up to you at that point whether you keep those chickens as pets or find a new home or have a end-of-life plan for them. If you need to decide if chickens aren't laying, do you still want to feed them, or what your plan is for your flock. Chickens themselves can live for several years, up to 5 or 10 years, even more. It just depends on the kind of care and condition they're in. So that is a consideration to think about. Okay, we're going to move into poultry nutrition now. So it's very important that the birds get fresh, clean water every day. And I put up here a picture this is the kind of water that I personally like to use, but any kind is fine. There's some, I think, automatic versions out there maybe, if you look around. I actually fill mine up probably every 2 days, but the main thing is that you want to make sure they always have access to fresh, clean water. So mine sometimes like to throw some hay or dirt into the bottom here, and I have to rinse it out every day, but I may not have to fill up the whole thing every day. You want to make sure the water is kept in the shade so it doesn't get really hot during the day, because they won't want to drink water that's been sitting out in the sun and gets really hot. You should have a cool water source for them. For their feed, you want to keep it in airtight containers. So something like a basic trash can will work. You want it to be protected from heat and sunlight, because heat and sunlight both can break down the vitamins and minerals, which are important to the animals. And then you also want to keep moisture out and rodents and other pests. So not only mice, but think about like raccoons and possums. They also, love to get in feed barrels or into feed bags. So you can't just, leave a feed bag sitting out. You'll have to keep it protected. You won't want to use a feed if it gets moldy or it smells, or even if it gets wet. You probably won't want to use it because of the risk of mold that maybe you can't see yet. The last thing is it would be wise to use a high-quality feed even if you have to pay a little bit more for it, because you'll usually get a better concentration of nutrients in that feed, and it will probably pay off in the long run. So one thing that I found interesting is that there's different formulations for vitamins and minerals. So depending on what form that you find those in, they could be more easily absorbed by the animal. So some of the cheaper feeds have forms of vitamins and minerals that are not as easily absorbed as some of the higher quality feeds. So it's just a consideration as you're selecting feed, what will work with your budget, and think of the economics of the feed. They may not eat as much of a higher quality feed rather than a low quality feed. So even if poultry have access to pasture, they will still need supplemental feed just to balance out their diet. They may not eat as much, but they are not able to get all of their nutritional needs met from the pasture. So that supplemental feed is really important to have access to at all times, just to make sure they have a balanced diet, they're getting the calcium that they need for egg laying, and the nutrients that they need, especially in meat birds as well. They will need the feed to help them grow. As the birds grow from chicks into adults, you'll want to move the height of the drinker and feeder. So I have my feeder suspended from a little like rafter in our barn, so that one, they can't get and stand on the top of it, and two, it just protects it from them scratching dirt or defecating in it as well. So I don't have to worry about cleaning out and wasting feed every day. My water, I bought a larger pan and turned it upside down so that it raises it up a few inches off the ground. And in the winter, when I put a heater on, I leave it on top of that so it's even a little bit taller. So you can put it about their chest level and it'll be fine. Just kind of watch when you put it in there and adjust the height, how they respond to it. And as long as they're still eating and drinking and not struggling to do so, then you're probably good. So last thing is, make sure you're not feeding the different poultry species all the same. So a turkey is not going to eat the same as a duck, which is not going to eat the same as a chicken. So for each of those, I'd recommend looking up different requirements for the species or contacting your extension educator if you need help with that, just to see what that specific species needs. And also requirements are different depending on the stage of life. So chicks are going to need a higher protein. Usually they have some medicated feed as well. then you can move them to a grower diet. When you get into kind of those teenage years, they start, or teenage stage where they start, getting their more adult feathers, and then when they get to egg laying, they'll need a different diet as well. There are some good charts online about the different stages and what protein that they find, what they need. My recommendation is when you look for that, you could type in, nutritional requirements of chickens, and then I would recommend typing in extension afterwards, because you'll get publications from the university that way. So what are the different components of the poultry diet? Again, I'll repeat this: water. It's essential for life, so it's the most important nutrient. So like I said, that 4-H is one of my job titles as well. And so during showmanship, one of the questions that the judges like to ask is to the kids, what is the most important nutrient for your animal? And the answer is water. So a lot of them might say feed or hay or whatever, but it's water. So if the animal goes off feed, or they're not wanting to eat, or they're not feeling well, usually the first thing we need to make sure is that they have clean water that doesn't have maybe some toxic elements to it or something. The second most important thing is meeting the protein needs. So protein is made up of amino acids, and those are important to build muscle. They help have healthy feathers and skin and tissues, and also help to have healthy bones. So supplying the right protein at the right age stage, like we talked earlier, is important to make sure they have the building blocks that they need to grow. Oh, I went the wrong way. So the next most important after water and protein is energy, and those are supplied in two different ways. First, by carbohydrates, which would be like a starch, which can be found in grains such as corn, wheat, and sorghum. And then it can also come from fats. So fat is made up of fatty acids, and there are some fatty acids that we call essential, and they cannot be made in the poultry's digestive system, so they have to be provided in the diet. And one example of that is linoleic acid, which usually if you look in the feed tag, which we will go over here in a minute, it can be found or sourced from corn, sunflower, or safflower oils. And deficiency in that linoleic acid can cause reduced disease resistance in the flock. So the final components of poultry diets include those minerals and vitamins, like I mentioned earlier. So the most important minerals for laying hens, first is calcium, and then phosphorus, sodium, magnesium, potassium, and chloride. And then you have your trace elements here, including copper, iodine, iron, manganese, selenium, and zinc. So all of these vitamins and minerals are usually supplied at the right levels in commercially available diets. So if you are trying to create your own diet and not use a commercial feed, I would really encourage that you work with a nutritionist or do quite a bit of research if you don't want to take the traditional commercial feed route. So the vitamins include vitamin A, D, E, and K, which are the fat-soluble vitamins, and then they also need water-soluble vitamins, including the B complex and vitamin C. So while poultry can make their own vitamin C, it can help them during periods of stress to have additional vitamin C added into their diet. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about forms of feed, because this is something growing up, we always, I think, fed crumble to our laying hens. And then when I started raising my own hens, I wanted to look into it because I saw pelleted feeds in the store. And so what some of the research shows is that pelleted can have a little bit less waste. And personally, I think it has a little bit less dust as well. So that is up to you. It's a personal preference. Mash is the simplest form, so it's not in a crumble or pelleted. And then crumbled is like the second layer processing, and pelleted is just like a, pelleted feed for any other species. So I like the pelleted, but you can use whatever works for you and your flock. So you will want to read the feed tag, especially if you have laying hens, to ensure that the diet contains at least 2.5 to 3.5% calcium. For the other species, if you're raising meat birds or other type, if you have turkeys or ducks or anything, it's just finding those resources online, which your extension educator can help you with as well, that see what their diet needs, and then make sure you read the feed tag so that you're meeting the needs of that animal. The final thing, scratch grains. This is especially for poultry, like chickens. Mine really love that. It's a good enrichment activity for them to give them some grains each day. And there's some research that says if you give them some of those grains in the winter, because they're whole or just partially cracked instead of processed like the crumble or pelleted feeds, that can help keep them a little bit warmer, because they have to go through more of a digestive process to break those down. So that could be something that you can use just to buy a bag of scratch grains to give them a little bit in winter to help keep them warm. And I do have a link that will be posted in the comments about nutrition for backyard flocks, and that will include information on at what stage, what kind of protein, and different things you should be looking at. And so there's a lot of good information in that link that will be posted there. So I just want to go through the basics of reading a feed tag. First, one of the main things you'll want to look at is the crude protein. So this is what will change based on what feed you look at. And so you'll need to match that with what the requirements of the animals that you have in their life stage. So usually the grower ration has like a 22% protein or a 20% protein, and then laying feeds for hens that are laying have usually a 16 or an 18% protein. And then again, like we said on the previous slide, check the calcium amount. So here they list a minimum and a maximum. So they're guaranteeing you that there's at least 2.25% calcium in this feed, and there will be no more than 4% calcium in that feed. The next thing is down here at the bottom. So calcium levels should be sufficient. However, if soft shells become an issue, we recommend supplementing oyster shell. So I believe the previous slide we said at least 2.5% calcium. So this one, if it is just that minimum amount, they could be lacking a little bit. So you'll know if you go to crack open those shells that you have, if you test them and they seem really thin, they break really easy, then you might want to supplement some kind of calcium. Oyster shell is a source for calcium, and I know there's different formulations and things available at most of the box stores for calcium. So you can also look for different, check out and compare the brands of feed and see if there's other ones available at the place that you shop that has a higher minimum calcium level with them. So we're going to move into basic health care, and I just wanted to put the disclaimer out there that I am not a veterinarian. So I always recommend that you have a relationship with your local veterinarian. They can help you create a health plan and lead you on give you a specific plan for your flock and your home, because if you work with that local veterinarian, we hope that they would know you and your situation a little bit better so they can tailor their recommendations to you, your size of your flock, and the specific breeds and stuff that you have. And also, once you have that relationship with your veterinarian, you're more likely to be able to get in when an emergency may arise, versus if you wait to contact a vet just when you have an emergency, they may be less likely, you know, to work with that because they don't have an existing relationship with you. So the first steps of basic health care for poultry is to source your birds from reputable places. So places like Tractor Supply and Rural King are okay. Their birds come from hatcheries that have certified disease-free and blood testing called NPIP for pularium and typhoid. So those are safe places to get birds, as well as from hatcheries directly. Will also sell eggs that you can either hatch or they'll sell one-day-old chicks, and those will be good places to get them. If you're buying from just a neighbor or someone down the street, you might want to be more careful and just make sure that they have had the vaccinations and health care, and they come from a place that seems clean and they are, you know, disease-free. So if you can see the place that they're coming from and they're kept in good conditions, and you know the other adult chickens that they have look healthy, then they are probably okay. But again, from the hatcheries or from places like the box store, it's definitely usually a safer bet. So anytime you have a question, especially regarding to vaccines or treatment of a certain malady that you see, I would recommend contact your veterinarian because they're going to be the ones with the most training to help you. And then just keeping good hygiene and biosecurity at your house for those animals. So it's probably not a good idea to let you know, your neighbors bring their chickens over so they can have play days or something, because that's how you can transmit disease. The other thing is make sure you wash your hands and stuff after you get done treating your poultry or cleaning their coop or any of that. So it's important that you kind of get to know your birds. So spend some time out there with them. That way you know kind of what they look like and how they act when they're healthy. So you'll know if they, you know, aren't acting like they normally do, that something may not be right. So it's a lot easier if you kind of know the normal personalities of each chicken, if you will. Then it'll be easier to know when maybe something's not quite right. So just some general indicators of pain or bad health conditions in poultry would include a crouched posture, closing their eyes a lot, or keeping them closed for long periods of time, head drawn into their body, you know, if they're just kind of tucked together, not moving a lot, inactivity, they're not eating or drinking or doing you know, the normal activities that chickens enjoy doing. If they have dirty, ruffled feathers, now obviously if they're going out and taking their dust bath, they're going to be a little dirty, but some of the external mites, you know, also give out a really dirty look, which we'll talk about here in a minute. If they do get an injury, they'll often avoid using that injured limb. So if they seem to be holding their wing or a certain leg or limping around, that could be a sign that something is wrong. And then also, you can get a lot of information just from looking at their droppings. If you know what they look like on a normal day and maybe they're, you know, changing colors or they're really loose or something, then you can see that as an indicator of their health as well. So some common external parasites include mites, lice, ticks, fleas, and poultry bugs or bed bugs. So You can just do a general check over your birds. They recommend at least every 2 months. So what you can do is just hold them and spread a feather out and look throughout the feathers or at the base of the feathers for any kind of moving bug or buildup. So mites will usually have this like black buildup, and you can see that there. And if that's the case, I would recommend contacting your veterinarian. They can look at it more closely. Or I'm not sure if some veterinarians, if you could get a good photo of it and send it to them, they might also be able to answer that. Okay, I also wanted to talk about injurious pecking. So this would just be like chickens pecking at each other and taking out feathers or causing injury. So this can be caused by several different things, including the breed. So some breeds are more aggressive than others. If you have too many animals in a small space, they will do this just as a stress response or if they're bored. Abrupt changes in the environment could cause them. So such as, you know, if you introduce new chickens and stuff into the flock, that could cause stress. If, you know, a dog would be, you know, outside their pen barking at them or something, that could cause stress. And then just the general amount of space and resources that each animal has. So the less space that each bird has, the more aggression that they'll generally show because they're competing for space. And then if they can't get to the drinking and feeding spots, then that will also cause them to become aggressive. So to help manage that, just make sure you're providing enough space, and that will depend on your breed, how big they are. Obviously, more space is generally better. You can increase the number of feeders or drinkers so they have a couple different options to drink or eat from. And also you can provide enrichment for them. So hay bales, they'll like to get up and climb on them. Mine like a slice of hay every once in a while. They pick through that. Sometimes I'll give them hay and a little bit of scratch grains on top, and they have some fun, you know, scratching through the grains and scratching through the, you know, hay as well. Create some perches so they can get up and perch. You can create some spaces for birds that might be at the lower pecking order. So if they're getting pecked more than they are pecking, they might want a spot that they can hide. So just maybe some kind of cubes or bins that they can go in and sit, like a nest box or something may work too if it has a top on it, as long as there's enough that they can get out in there and out away from those other birds. And then you can also do hanging like a lettuce or cabbage or something from the ceiling, and they'll peck at that to keep entertained as well. So the other thing is, for the pecking, there is an ointment available. I've seen it at both Tractor Supply and on Amazon. It's called Rooster Buster, and you can put that on the spot if they do start to peck, and that will keep them from wanting to peck more because it's got some tea tree oil in it, which they don't like the smell of. It's kind of strong, so they will not peck that area any longer, and it'll kind of help let it heal up and stuff. Usually once the feathers grow back, they're less likely to start pecking, but once they have kind of a bare spot, it's kind of like a target for them. They see, you know, the skin there and they want to peck it more. The final thing I wanted to talk about was vaccinations. So there's a resource in the chat box that'll be posted, a link to information about vaccinations, but vaccinating can help prevent disease in flocks. So generally, small flocks don't vaccinate as much as commercial operations do, but they can really help. So if you have a history of disease problems, then vaccination could be a good option for you. If you're going around and showing at poultry shows, vaccinations could be helpful. And then if you're adding new birds to the flock, then that would also be helpful. You can get vaccines from hatcheries or poultry suppliers. Your veterinarian might also have them. You'll just have to call and ask. So sometimes they come in larger bottles, and you may not need all of that if you only have a few birds. So maybe worth seeing if there's some other families or owners in your area that maybe you could split the supplies. Just make sure that each person is handling those vaccines as recommended on the label. So if it says to keep it refrigerated or out of the sun or whatever, you want to make sure everyone's handling that correctly. Okay, and with that, I will start answering questions now.
All right. Assuming you guys can hear me, I'm going to post some links that Brooke mentioned about some of the things you can look up concerning vaccinations or ectoparasites. But I will give Brooke her first question and get that posted while she answers it. So Brooke, our first question that we got is, how old do chicks need to be to get grit?
I would say to wait until you would go to move them out into the coop. Generally, those beginning diets, or when they're young, they don't need much grit. So probably once you switch them over to that grower ration, when it's recommended to switch, and I don't have that in front of me right now. Let's see. So probably once, at least you could start introducing it at 6 weeks, and they'll just eat what they need. They won't, if they don't eat it, they may not need it yet. So they're pretty good at kind of self-regulating.
All right. For our next question, we had someone ask, are pine shavings beddings material okay for chicks?
I think it could be okay, but you have to be careful that they sometimes stick and stuff. So really, for me, the best, what I use for our chicks is usually newspaper. I know a lot of people use newspaper, so I would recommend that over most any other bedding materials. Just get some old newspapers and lay them down. Then once they get older, once they're old enough to be moved outside or whatever, as they get bigger and stuff, you can switch to basically whatever bedding material you like. They like straw or hay to kind of scratch at and stuff like that as well. So.
All right. For our next question, Rod is asking, what is the current thinking on putting eggshells for consumption?
For putting eggshells in there for consumption by the bird? Can we clarify that?
Rod, could you expand on that? Oh, yeah, he did. He says yes.
I haven't heard that, so is that just to provide an additional source of calcium, maybe the thinking there? But I would say instead of the eggshells, I would just buy that oyster shell or another calcium supplement. I haven't heard of putting the eggshells. I haven't read that anywhere. So to me, it wouldn't be the hassle for me to try to get them and put them back in there. I would just buy a supplement.
All right. Our next question is, should you feed less scratch in hot months?
I think it's probably fine to feed it year round, but maybe on the hottest days, you wouldn't feed a whole bunch of it. I would say as long as you're below, 75, then you can just give them their normal amount. It's just something to make sure in the winter it can help a little bit, but it's not detrimental in the summer.
Our next question is, do ectoparasites generally affect one location first? I can go ahead and answer this one. You'll want to check the vent or anal area of the chicken. Northern fowl mite will often be present in that area, but they aren't necessarily restricted to those spots. The mites and lice that can affect chickens, their bodies are designed to be able to navigate through feathers to get to the skin. So while you can use that spot as a good area to act as a guide and where you want to treat, but the whole chicken would be at risk. The next question you have there is frequency of dusting an early indicator of parasite loading. I looked through some materials after I saw that question posted, and I did not find any indication of that. However, I'd want to do more research unless someone else knows that and can answer for me.
I haven't heard that, and I haven't seen it in the materials as I was preparing today. I think just making sure you're checking your birds every few months will help you navigate those. You'll be able to see them. I know at our 4-H show last year, the judge found some lice on some of the chickens, and it was, if you just wait a second when you have the wing held open, you'll see the movement. So I would definitely just look at that more at a first chicken, look at it closely on the feathers and stuff rather than trying to take an environmental approach to that.
No, this is Amy from Monroe County. I'd add, it is important to provide a good area for dust baths for chickens. That is sort of one of their hygiene methods, and can help prevent parasites. So do provide them space for that. I also don't know about increased frequency related to parasite load, but it is worth providing a tub or space for them to be able to dust out their feathers regularly.
And the only thing that I would add to that is just whenever you get new birds, double check them before you add them to your existing population, and make sure you know who you're getting your birds from, so that way you can just try to avoid introducing potential infestation to your flock. So our next question on here is, what was the name of the oil treatment to place on bare spots to deter pecking?
It's Rooster Booster. There might be some other things available as well. If you just look up anti-peck ointment, there's some options on there, but that was the one that seemed the most tailored to the pecking.
All right. Thank you, Phil, for helping me post a few of those things. Let's see, we have a question: how much calcium do growing chicks need? Still the 2.5 to 3.5%.
I have that. Let me look at this other. 1 second. Have that pulled up here. Let me get it. So on the chart that I have from Alabama, which I think is one of the links that was posted. Hang on. I can post that link. It says on here, for the starter ration, they recommend 0.8 to 1% calcium. For grower and developer, from 0.8 to 1% calcium, and then laying is that 2.5 to 3.5, like I said. So they still need a little bit of calcium for bone development and stuff, but it's not as critical in those growing chicks to have that higher level of calcium, because the laying hens really need it just because of all the calcium that's needed to make those hard shells around the eggs.
All right, so the last question I think we have, you said they can't get all their nutrients from the pasture. Can they get all of their nutrients from feed, and is feeding scraps okay?
Yes, the commercial feeds are formulated to provide all the nutrients that they need, obviously other than water. So they can get all their nutrients from feed. Some scraps are okay. I don't have a list offhand, but you would want to just double check that, find a online resource or contact your extension educator to help you to determine what scraps are okay and what scraps maybe aren't the best. So things like lettuce and cabbage and greens are generally fine, but I wouldn't feed them any meat scraps for sure. Most vegetables are okay, but there are some that you shouldn't feed, and I don't have that list off the top of my head, but we can try to get something for that and send it out with the recording.
All right, do we have any other questions?
I think I got one, maybe that's just to me. We have a chicken that has an injury and won't move except to flap her wings to move around. We have isolated her but can't seem to figure out what the injury is. She eats and drinks well, but it is not improving. What are the steps you take for diagnosing an ailment, and how long before you contact a vet? I would say that if you've given her a few days in isolation, like 1 or 2 days, and she's not any better, that I would be taking her to a vet now, or contacting your vet in whatever process, if they have special processes right now for COVID-19. But it's good that she's eating and drinking, but it could be something that they need to look at further.
And they also do get a condition, I don't know if you've examined her feet carefully, they do get a condition called bumblefoot on occasion. So if she's eating and drinking and seems to have some energy to flap around, but her mobility is limited, I'd be sure to examine her feet carefully. They can get other feet conditions as well. So,
okay, that's good.
So we did get one more question in. Do you have any suggestions for chicks 1 to 2 weeks old who start to not seem to be doing well?
I would need probably more specifics on not seem to be doing well, like what exactly that means, but I would just make sure that the water that they're getting is good and fresh, clean, and make sure you have the right spacing for them, the right amount of space. When they're smaller, they like to be in closer quarters, so don't spread them out too far when they're little. Some the medicated feed is to help keep them from, especially what's called coccidia, which would be indicated by a loose stool. That medicated feed will help with that. So I would see, you can contact your vet and they describe to them exactly what you're feeding and the symptoms. But they would probably want to know what you're feeding and if it's medicated and stuff when they call. So that would be something to have ahead of time before you call your vet.
All right, I think that is the last of our questions then.
Okay. Feel free to contact any of your extension educators. Their emails I had at the beginning, so you can watch the recording, or you can just Google your county and extension agent, extension county office, and call them. We're happy to help.
Okay, thank you everyone, and we hope to see you next week at the same time and place. I believe, who is going next? Is it Sadie next week?
Yes, Sadie and Dana.
All right, and do you recall what they'll be going over?
Yep, they're going to go over housing, and then Dana's going to talk a little bit about laws and what Terre Haute has implemented, and then maybe information on how you find those local laws within your own town if you're trying to raise poultry within city limits.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And please remember, feel free to contact us if you have any questions.